While I review the best identity theft protection services for a living, I can't say that I was exactly excited to stress test these services myself when I was recently the victim of identity theft. Yep, you heard that right. A hacker managed to recently socially engineer their way into one of my bank accounts and change the email address and phone number associated with it. Not great. Well, at least I'd get the chance to explore whether three of the leading identity theft protection services, Aura, Identity Guard, and Identity Force, were actually of any help when I set out to resolve this mess. In this video, I'll be explaining how a low-life identity thief managed to infiltrate my account in the first place, the one step I took to immediately counter their attack, and whether or not my existing identity theft protection services were of any help at all. Based on this recent experience, I've now updated my answer to what is the best identity theft protection service in 2024, and I think you're going to find my new answer to this question surprising. If you have recently been the victim of identity theft, go ahead and check out the links in the video description below. We're going to have plenty of helpful resources for you there. So what happened to me? On December 19th of last year, I got the notification that nobody wants to get. It said that my email address and phone number associated with my bank, a small local credit union, had been changed. I didn't do that. I saw this notification about 20 minutes after the change had been made and immediately called my bank. This is where I paused to inject a bit of advice. Make sure to always use a separate email address specifically for your banking needs. Remember, your email is part of your PII or personally identifying information. So even if a hacker has a very incomplete picture of you, and they just know, for example, your full name and an email address, then you are vulnerable because the security question could well be what email address is associated with your account. And your email address, it's already out there. Mine is, yours is. Go to the site that you see on the screen here for proof of that. At the time that this breach occurred, I had active protection from both Aura and Identity Guard. And I had an inactive subscription at literally dozens of other ID theft protection services. For a reason that I'll explain in a little bit, I tried to immediately reactivate my Identity Force subscription, more on that later. And this process of having my identity stolen while having two, soon to be three active protection services enabled really gave me the opportunity to look at these from a unique angle. Both Identity Guard and Aura sent me an email notification at exactly the same time, and unfortunately I missed it. The verification I got is what we call an identity verification alert, and it's one of the most important alerts the service can give. These alerts are what they sound like. They mean that somebody has just verified your identity. And in my case, it was exactly 7 minutes after first receiving this alert that my email address and phone number were changed. This is notable because had I been more attentive to my email alerts, I might have been able to call my bank in time in order to intercept this hack in progress. Now, whichever service you go with, expect to get a lot of alerts and know that many of them are meaningless. For example, Identity Force, they send me sex offender alerts anytime a sex offender moves into my zip code. Well, it turns out that there are registered sex offenders pretty much everywhere. Getting a daily alert about their movement, for me at least, isn't particularly helpful. But the one alert that you do want to pay very close attention to is the identity verification alert. If you haven't applied for a loan, if you haven't applied for a credit card recently, and you get this alert, it potentially indicates that something is very amiss. Now, with this hack underway, I knew that I had precious minutes in order to regain control of my account. I immediately called my bank, which was just as surprised as I was that this was happening. This brings me to another important feature offered by identity protection services, and that is white glove fraud resolution. These services have representatives who will work with you until the identity theft you're experiencing is resolved. In theory, I could have called Aura, could have called Identity Guard, I could have called Identity Force and requested that a representative sit in on a call between me and my bank. But doing so would have taken additional time, and I didn't have that. However, after the fact, I did call Aura, Identity Guard, and Identity Force, and I asked their reps a series of questions because I wanted to see how their advice applied to my situation, whether they gave me good or bad advice. The first company I called was Aura, and I'll be totally transparent here and say that initially it was a frustrating experience. And that's because for the first time when I called Aura, I encountered a phone tree, which I hadn't in the past, and it took about 5 minutes to get in touch with a dedicated resolution specialist. Now, 5 minutes might not sound like a long time, but if you're experiencing identity theft in real time, trust me, 5 minutes feels like an eternity. When I did get through to a rep at Aura, they were very helpful, and they recommended that I lock or freeze my credit at each of the three main credit bureaus, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. I suspected that they were going to give me this advice, and in fact, when I called each of these three companies, I was very careful to ask this one specific question. What else can I do to reduce my risk of identity theft in the future? The reason I asked this specific question is because there really is a correct answer to it. Lock your credit at each of the three main credit bureaus. This is the one thing that you can do today for free in less than 30 minutes that will greatly reduce your risk of identity theft. So if a representative did not give me this advice, I would be very skeptical of the quality of their support. Back to Aura. When I was talking with them, they asked for permission to apply an extra level of security, of scrutiny to my account, and I gave them that. And to their credit, I did end up receiving a call a few days later when my identity was once again verified at a financial institution, but this time for legitimate purposes. Next up was Identity Guard, and remember, Aura owns Identity Guard. They are, at this point, the same company. Was my experience with Identity Guard's customer support reps similar to that of Aura's? Yes, very. It's the same call center after all. So while Aura and Identity Guard are both owned by the same parent company, you should know that Aura's packages are going to come out at a lower price point typically than Identity Guard's, and they're going to be a lot more feature rich. So if you're considering Aura versus Identity Guard, just go with Aura. It's going to be the better option for you. As always, exclusive discounts for Home Security Heroes viewers are available in the video description below. My experience with Identity Force, it was lackluster. To their credit, they were very easy to get in touch with, and I was able to get through to a rep in less than 5 minutes. But, and this is important, the rep was not particularly proactive, and disturbingly, I was not seeing the same identity verification alerts in my Identity Force dashboard that I was with Identity Guard and Aura. And here I'm talking about the legitimate identity verification alerts that I got when I applied for a new line of credit, and when I had Identity Guard, Aura, and Identity Force all active. I should have received an alert from Identity Force, and I didn't. And remember, you can go directly to each of the 3 major credit bureaus to check for fraudulent identity verifications. You don't actually need a service to check for this, although a service does add an extra layer of convenience. Now, my unfortunate experience also gave me the opportunity to test the credit lock feature offered by each of these 3 companies in real time. As mentioned earlier, freezing or locking your credit at each of the 3 main bureaus is a very good security precaution. And you can do it directly at each of the 3 bureaus, and you don't need a service for this, but a service does make the process easier. Because with some of these services, you can freeze your file at one of the main credit bureaus with the click of a button. You don't need to spend the 10 or 20 minutes that it takes to set up a new account or to call them directly. Now, unfortunately, no one service offers the ability to lock your credit file at each of the 3 main bureaus. For instance, with Aura, you can lock and unlock your file at Experian, and Identity Force used to advertise one-click credit lock at TransUnion. And this is actually the reason that I reactivated my Identity Force account in the first place, but I was unable to find this credit lock anywhere in their updated dashboard. So I don't know what happened to it, but it appears to no longer be there. Additionally, in order to reactivate my Identity Force account, I had to do it by calling in. I couldn't do it online, which was definitely a point of frustration for me. Now, if you suspect that you are the victim of identity theft, you're going to want to pay attention to your credit score. That's because if somebody has stolen your identity, the number one thing that they're most likely to do is take out credit in your name. Of course, the thief taking out these loans has no intention of ever paying them back, and so your credit score is going to quickly suffer. Of the 3 services discussed in this review, Aura and Identity Guard, at the time that I'm making this video, they are both showing my updated credit score, but Identity Force has been really slow to update, and I don't know why that is. And remember that in accordance with federal law, you can go to this URL that you see on the screen here and get a free copy of your credit report. You don't need a service in order to get your credit report. As I went through this process firsthand, it became clear to me how important emotional support is. If you're currently navigating some form of identity theft, I would say it's very important to enlist somebody on your side who can help you through the process, who can help you to think clearly, at a time when you really might not be. I know that I personally was not thinking clearly, and I'm way better equipped than the average person to navigate identity theft. I talk about it for a living. But I was lucky enough to be able to call 2 close friends who helped me think clearly at this stressful time. My advice to you is to identify almost like a trusted beneficiary, somebody you can call if something stressful like identity theft is to occur. Have that trusted person on speed dial, and don't be afraid to reach out to them if you need their advice. This is also potentially where a representative at a company that offers this white glove support could potentially step in and help you with some of that emotional burden. The question on my mind was really, how was I hacked in the first place and who did it? As mentioned, it appears that this was a classic social engineering attack, wherein this crook called my bank repeatedly posing as me, and they were able to verify my identity using some very basic publicly available information. And I suspect they did this by providing a very sympathetic, believable sob story. Something like, I'm traveling right now, I can't access my phone in order to verify 2-factor authentication, but here's the email address associated with my account, here's a current or past address, something like that. Eventually, they managed to get through to a rep who broke protocol. Now, luckily, I was able to regain access to my account with no damage done except for some serious emotional scarring and the feeling that we're all a lot more vulnerable than we might think we are. As far as who did this, I'll never know. My bank won't tell me the email address or phone number that the account was changed to unless requested by police. And while filing a police report in your local jurisdiction is a very good idea, as is filing a report at identitytheft.gov, my guess is that my local police office has better things to do than investigate an instance of identity theft where no damage actually occurred. One important sort of dark factoid that you should know is that most victims of identity theft are victimized by people they know personally. Just something for you to keep in mind as you go through the process of elimination here. So how do I feel about identity theft protection now that I've gone through this experience myself? My new answer: it's complicated. I don't want to give you a false sense of security by thinking that if you sign up for identity theft protection, you are guaranteed to not have identity theft occurred. It's not that simple. In fact, LifeLock was sued by the FTC for making the claim that they could prevent identity theft. They can't, no company can. But you can greatly reduce your risk of identity theft, and these are the steps that I would recommend you take in order to do so. I'd still recommend signing up for a service if you can afford it. I'd also look for a service where you can sign over power of attorney to the company. Another step, lock your credit at each of the 3 bureaus. This is the single highest impact thing that you can do today in order to prevent identity theft. I also recommend you set up a verbal password at any of your financial institutions that allow it. I recommend using a reputable password manager with a very strong master password. Another tip, don't use real personally identifying information in order to verify yourself. If the security question is, for example, where did you go to elementary school, or what was the make and model of your first car, use fake information. Always set up 2FA or two-factor authentication. And unless you have no other options, avoid text message two-factor authentication. It's better than nothing, but it still leaves you vulnerable to something called SIM swapping. You should also understand that if you report identity theft to the FTC within 2 days of discovering it, your liability is going to be greatly reduced. So there's not a magic band-aid solution that's going to eliminate your risk of identity theft completely, but I hope that some of the steps I explained in this video at least give you a head start. As always, discounts available in the video description below, and I'll see you in the next video here. Take care.